You're up early?
Yeah, I've been awake half the night. Everything's just going round and round in my head. It seemed pointless lying there, so I thought maybe you'd like a hand.
No, it's all right, love. I can manage.
No, let me. Help me take my mind off things. Besides...
What?
Well, I might not be doing it again.
No, come on. I've told you to stop that nonsense.
I'm terrified, Josh.
Yeah, I don't know. War, death, famine, disease.
That's right. Cheer us up.
Oh, I don't write the news, Mr. Wilkes. Not anymore, any road. I should be in that court today, in press box. A Beckindale story needs a Beckindale reporter.
You're better off where you are.
Oh, maybe.
I'd be glad to stay here. I'm dreading it. There. You don't think this tie's too garish, do you?
No. Sober as a judge.
That's not even remotely funny, Amos.
How are you feeling?
Nervous as hell. What if they ask me about what I said to Kate?
You'll have to tell them.
Even if it means getting Kate into trouble?
Well, she's already in trouble, Sarah. You'll be under oath. You've got no choice. Which one's our counsel?
One on the left.
Who's she talking to?
That's Charles Hazel, the prosecuting counsel.
You're allowed to do that?
Why not? They're old friends.
Yeah, but they're on opposing sides.
Only in court, you know. Don't worry, once they get started, you'll think they're bitter enemies.
Look, you're right.
Shall we join Miss Buchan?
Morning, Charles.
Good morning, Mrs. Sugden.
Good morning.
Excuse us, Charles.
Certainly.
What's your family?
Why?
Well, it helps to build up the picture of the God-fearing family woman who made a mistake.
Well, that's what she is.
Let's hope the jury thinks so too. You'll have to leave us now, Mrs. Sugden.
Bye, lovey.
Look.
Go along now, Kate. We'll see you inside.
Mom, see you afterwards.
I hope so.
Good luck, Kate.
Right. Shall we all go in?
Catherine Mary Sugden, you are charged on this indictment with the offence of causing death by reckless driving, contrary to Section 1 of the Road Traffic Act 1988. The particulars are that you, Catherine Mary Sugden, on the night of the 16th of August 1990, caused the death of Peter William Whiteley by reckless driving on the Robblesfield Road, Beckindale. Are you guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
You may sit down.
If it pleases you, Your Honour. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts in this case are not in dispute. We will hear evidence to show that Peter Whiteley was killed by a car driven at speed on a dark, narrow country lane. The car being driven by Mrs. Sugden, who then failed the breathalyzer test. None of these facts will be disputed here today. Now, the only issue we are considering is whether Kate Sugden knew she was too drunk to drive when she got behind the wheel of her car that night, and in so doing behaved in a reckless fashion.
There wasn't anyone else you could leave him with.
Obviously.
I feel like I'm stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. Kate on one hand and Lynn on the other.
Well, it would have been nice if you'd mentioned it to me first, that's all. Rather than just turning up here with him. Especially on your first day. It's not exactly a good start, is it?
I know, I'm sorry, Kim. It's just that Lynn was so wonderful to me when Jackie died. I don't know what I would have done without her.
Well, I suppose we'll just have to cope.
Do you want me to take him?
No, you carry on. I'll see to him.
Would you please describe the defendant's behavior in the Woolpack that night?
It was perfectly normal.
Normal?
Yes.
Isn't it in fact the case that Mrs. Sugden was behaving in an aggressive fashion toward Mr. Whiteley?
She told him off.
Wouldn't pick to fight be more accurate?
No.
All right. She told him off in the middle of a crowded bar at the Woolpack Inn.
She was angry.
Angry enough, in fact, to hit Mr. Whiteley.
Well...
Did she or did she not hit Mr. Whiteley?
She slapped him, yes.
And what was Mr. Whiteley doing when she slapped him? Answer the question, please.
Nothing.
Nothing. Thank you. She hit Peter Whiteley, who was having a quiet drink in the pub. Hardly the actions of an upright and conscientious woman.
How long have you known Mrs. Sugden, Mr. Wilkes?
Best part of 2 years.
You and she are partners in the farm her husband runs, are you not?
She was made a partner last year.
And why was that?
She wanted to make a contribution to the way the farm was run. She had very firm ideas about organic farming. She was concerned about the environment.
Your Honour, my learned friend's concern for the planet is highly commendable, but is it really pertinent?
I'm trying to establish that Mrs. Sugden is a hard-working, caring woman, deeply concerned about the future of her children, and not the loudmouthed, violent person my learned friend would have the jury think she is.
I think that's fair, Mr. Hazelrig.
Right, I'm ready. Where's Seth?
It's only just after 11, Archie.
Morning.
Where have you been?
Dodging Turner.
Well, I can't take your photograph. We're looking like that.
Why not?
Because nobody will want to go out with somebody who looks like Wurzel Gummage's dad.
He's right, Seth. You ought to smarten up a bit.
Come on, get yourself off home and get your best suit on.
Best suit? On a Thursday? What am I going to tell Meg?
You'll think of something. Come on, and come straight back.
Would you say that Mrs. Sugden had a lot to drink that night, Miss Connolly?
A fair amount, I suppose.
How many drinks? 6? 7?
I didn't count.
Come on, Miss Connolly, you must have some idea.
Not really.
But you were serving Mrs. Sugden all evening, weren't you?
There were a lot of customers. Mrs. Sugden was just one.
I must insist.
Your Honour, the witness has answered the question.
If Your Honour will allow, this witness is a personal friend of the defendants. I would remind the court that Miss Connolly is also a hostile witness.
Very well, Mr. Hazelrig. It is your duty to answer fully, Miss Connolly.
How many drinks, Miss Connolly? 6 or 7?
Yes, 6.
Thank you. Now, Miss Connolly, according to the police evidence, you were heard to make a comment to Mrs. Sugden as she left the pub. What was it you said? Well?
I said, I won't say anything back at Emmerdale.
And what did you mean by that remark?
That I wouldn't mention the incident with Pete Whiteley.
Because you were aware that Mrs. Sugden had been behaving in an outrageous, indeed, a reckless fashion.
Well...
Is it true?
Yes.
And what did Mrs. Sugden say in reply?
Thanks.
Had to wait while Meg were pegging a washing out. What do you think then?
You're like a badly stuffed scarecrow. What do you think?
I think you should take his hat off.
Oh, come on, sit down. We'll get on with it. Right.
Are you using a flash?
Oh, hark at David Bailey. A bit of natural light's not going to hurt you. You're going to need all the help you can get, in fact. Right. Oh, stop fidgeting, Seth.
I can't decide.
What?
Which my best side is.
You're sitting on it. Right. Now smile.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the prosecution case, and it is now time to hear the defense. And I would emphasize at the outset that there hasn't been a moment since this terrible accident that Mrs. Sugden hasn't regretted her decision to drive that night. But she is not a reckless woman, and I contend that she did not behave recklessly that night. To that end, I intend to present witnesses who will testify that her action that night was no more than a moment's lapse in an otherwise unimpeachable life. Mr. Charlton, could you please tell the court what kind of person you consider Mrs. Sugden to be?
She is hard-working, conscientious, dedicated to her 2 children, Rachel and Mark, and devoted to her husband, Joe. She's a tireless worker, both with her husband on the farm they run and in the community, where she's deeply respected and loved. Since I've known her, she's pitched in tirelessly working for the church, even though her own work places great demands on her time. Mrs. Sugden is, in fact, going to be proposed for a place on the parochial church council.
Thank you.
Blooming cold out there today, Ma.
I know. Turn the central heating up. There's tea in the pot, fresh made.
Any news?
No, nothing.
Must be going all right then.
Yes, I hope so.
She'll be fine, you'll see.
I hope so. What with the rush to get out of the house this morning, I didn't have a chance to talk to her before she left.
Well, you can talk to her tonight when she comes home.
If she comes home.
Oh, come on, Ma. What can they give her? A stiff fine? A ban?
You obviously think very highly of Mrs. Sugden.
I do.
Tell us, Mr. Charlton, how active was she in the affairs of the church before the accident?
That's difficult to say.
I'm not surprised. When did you take over as curate at St. Mary's, Mr. Charlton?
August.
And your first duty was to bury Mr. Whiteley, I believe.
Yes.
The man the defendant ran over and killed.
Yes.
Is it not the case, Mr. Charlton, that Mrs. Sugden's sudden burst of energy vis-à-vis the church came after the accident? Before that, she had, in fact, been an infrequent visitor to the church. In fact, Mr. Charlton, this sudden flurry of activity on Mrs. Sugden's part was no more than a cynical attempt to establish herself in your eyes as a hard-working, pious woman.
That's not
one
fair.
That apparently succeeded.
No, that's quite wrong. Mrs. Sugden is a fine woman.
Isn't the fact of the matter, Mr. Charlton, that you are very much a newcomer to your vocation and haven't yet had enough experience of people to be able to form a proper character judgment?
I don't think that
Especially the kind of woman who deliberately sets out to convince, no doubt, well-meaning but very gauche young man that she's some sort of saint.
How would you describe Mrs. Sugden's handling of the vehicle during the journey home, Miss Carter?
Oh, very good. She wasn't driving fast, and she knows the road very well. At one point, we had to swerve to avoid an oncoming car, and he had his headlights on full beam. For a moment or two, we were rather dazzled by them, but Kate braked hard and managed to pull over. Otherwise, he would have hit us.
Go on.
Well, we came round the corner, and there he was, Mr. Whiteley. He just appeared from nowhere. We couldn't stop. Nobody could have. He was right in the middle of the road.
And this was just after Mrs. Sugden had swerved to avoid the oncoming car?
Yes, literally seconds later, that's all.
Mrs. Sugden had the car well under control?
Oh, yes, absolutely. She was driving very carefully, no more than 40 miles per hour. There was absolutely nothing she could do. Nobody could have.
Thank you, Miss Carter.
I would remind you, members of the jury, of the forensic evidence showing that Mrs. Sugden's car was travelling at between 40 and 45 miles per hour when she hit Mr. Whiteley. In fact, Miss Carter, Mrs. Sugden was going far too fast on such a narrow country road, wasn't she?
No, she was in total control. She was driving really carefully, considering that
Considering what? Considering she'd had too much to drink, is that what you were going to say?
No, I was going to say considering the weather conditions.
Which were dark and wet. Conditions, in fact, that would be difficult enough for a sober person to drive in.
I suppose so.
Making it even more reckless for Mrs. Sugden to go on the road that night.
Just imagine it's a triplet light, fantastic, with a beautiful bird on your arm.
If Turner had given me that Rosemary's telephone number, I could have saved me all this trouble.
Ah, Seth, where on earth have you been? What are you all dressed up for?
No special.
Come on, man, out with it. What are you up to?
Archie's been taking me photo.
Not on my time. What for?
Houghton Mating Agency. My application.
Well, I'm going to Houghton now. I shall expect to find you at work when I get back, right?
Right, Mr. Turner. Oh, going to Houghton, did you say?
Yes. Why?
You can drop that into a quick photo for me, can't you?
Mrs. Sugden, describe for us the moments between meeting the car and coming upon Mr. Whiteley.
We were driving down the Robblesfield Road at about 40 miles an hour. It's quite a narrow road. And suddenly I was blinded by a car coming in the opposite direction. I drove round the corner and there he was. I couldn't stop.
Just take your time.
I'm sorry. He was right in the middle of the road. I just didn't see him in time enough to stop. The road was wet and the car swerved a bit. And
What effect did the dazzling headlights of the car have on you?
I was blinded for a few seconds.
A few seconds? But enough to have impaired your vision for the crucial moments leading up to the collision?
Yes.
How long have you been driving?
About 20 years.
Any previous accidents?
No.
Or any kind of driving conviction?
No, none.
A completely clean driving record for 20 years. Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Sugden.
How much time was there between meeting that car and hitting Mr. Whiteley?
I've just said.
Tell us again and try to be a little more specific.
About a minute, I suppose.
A minute? Are you asking us to believe that you were still dazzled after a minute? Most of us have been in the situation of having been dazzled by a thoughtless motorist. Certainly, it's difficult to see for a few seconds, but a minute? No. I suggest you were driving too fast on a wet road, having already broken the law by driving your car under the influence of several drinks. The unfortunate Mr. Whiteley, walking home, keeping into the verge as best he could, was knocked down because you took that bend too fast in your condition.
No.
And then, by some aberration, no doubt caused by your alcohol-induced confusion, you decided to leave him, a badly injured man, lying in the road.
I wouldn't have left him if I'd known how badly injured he was.
You might have known that if you'd bothered to get out of that vehicle to look.
I was frightened. I panicked.
I don't believe it was panic. I believe you deliberately left the scene of the crime because you realized you were in serious trouble. The very fact that you left Mr. Whiteley to die in the gutter was an admission of that guilt.
Hi, Kim. Who's this then?
Slim Whiteley's baby. Kathy's looking after him while Lynn's at the trial.
Oh, yes, of course. Kathy's looking after him.
I couldn't resist. He's beautiful, isn't he?
Oh, they always are when they're content. It's when they get a pain or something the trouble starts. Do you need any help?
No, we're fine. He's been as good as gold so far. You?
By the sheer fact that Mrs. Sugden knew she was over the limit when she got into her car, she knew she was behaving recklessly. There can be no mitigation for what she did. It is your duty, as the representatives of society in this court today, to protect other innocent road users from the likes of Mrs. Sugden, to deter others from causing similar accidents, and by doing so, to prevent the kind of tragedy that has left a young woman, widowed and alone, with a now fatherless child. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you must find Mrs. Sugden guilty. Thank you.
I'd like to hazard a guess that there are a lot of people in this court today who've done what Mrs. Sugden did when she got in her car, knowing that she'd had too much to drink. But that doesn't make it any less regrettable. It was an act of folly that resulted in tragedy.
Oh, dear. Don't think I'm very good at this.
Why don't you let me have a go?
Okay.
Come on. There's a good boy.
It's harder than it looks, isn't it?
Oh, you get used to it eventually. There. Look.
Quite an expert, Dolly.
Ah, well, I've had a bit of practice. Wow.
What?
Oh, he's got his daddy's eyes, hasn't he?
That's what Kathy said.
Too charming for his own good, your daddy.
Until this unfortunate incident, her record of behaviour was impeccable, especially on the roads where she has never been in trouble, not even a parking ticket in 20 years of driving. She is a devoted wife and mother, and a highly valued member of the community, as Mr. Charlton has testified. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would remind you that this was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident nonetheless, that could have happened to any one of you if you had been driving along that road at that particular time. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard all the evidence. In reaching your verdict, I would draw your attention to the following facts.
I don't think I ever met Pete Whiteley.
No, he would have left about the time he came here, because of that thing he had with Rachel.
What?
Oh, I was just thinking. If he and Rachel hadn't had that affair, Kate wouldn't be in court now.
Catherine Mary Sugden, will you please rise? Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict which you all agree upon?
We have.
On the indictment of the offence of causing death by reckless driving, contrary to Section 1 of the Road Traffic Act 1988, how do you find?
Guilty.
My thanks to the jury. Catherine Mary Sugden, you have been found guilty on the charge of causing death by reckless driving. I take a very stern view of this offence. You have behaved thoughtlessly and irresponsibly, without regard for the well-being of other road users. And the result is a tragedy which will affect Mr. Whiteley's family for the rest of their days. Under the law, the maximum sentence I am allowed to pass is 10 years imprisonment. However, I have taken into account your previously unblemished record and the testimony of those who have vouched for your character. Therefore, I am inclined to take a slightly more lenient view. I sentence you to 2 years imprisonment and court costs of £800.